I'm David Grignon, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Menominee Tribe. We have had a lot of community support with this museum. A lot of people wanted to help any way they could. We said we wanted a facility that looks like the Grand Medicine Lodge of the Menominee people. As you can see, that's the way it looks today. Because we believe that bringing the things back that were sacred to us, when our people made everyday things, that there was ceremony that went along with that. They didn't just go ahead and do it. They offered their tobacco and they asked the Creator for help to build the things that they did. Getting this together was something that we knew that had to be done. We had to properly display and bring forth Menominee culture and language here to the Menominee people. And we just saw the Kane flying over there. The eagle came by and said, "You guys are doing a good job." At this time, I just want to say match women to everyone on this special day of our people. Oh.
Menominee History was funded in part by Irene Danielle Kress, the Evu Foundation, a charitable arm of the Capital Times, Ron and Patty Anderson, the estate of Dale Druckery, the Wisconsin History Fund, with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Friends of Wisconsin Public Television.
Uso, nature Menominee kakikidememos, staumachesin atua. Nina now qua kakikidememos, yes, yope. My name is David Grignon. Menominee name is Naukwa, which means when the sun is at mid-sky or noon. And I was given that name by one of our elders of the tribe about some years ago. But I'd like to speak about the Menominee people today and who we are and why we're here. Menominee is an Algonquin word. The full word is Menominee. It's people of the wild race. At the time of creation, the Creator gave us two special gifts so that we would always have them. Those two gifts were wild rice and maple sugar. And throughout the years after that, the Menominees were always in the midst of the wild rice. And it would seem like wherever we traveled, the rice would be there. And if we left that area, the rice would follow us. So the neighboring tribes gave us that name, Menominee, people of the wild rice, which we still have today. Our people have another name for ourselves as Kawas Mamachi Tawak, and that means the ancient people, because we've been here so long. We don't have a migration story. We are the original inhabitants, the ancient people of this land, what is now Wisconsin and Upper Michigan. The Menominees were created about 60 miles east of here at the mouth of the Menominee River. And it was here that our creation story started, our origin story. It was said that over 10,000 years ago, we were created at the spot at Menominee, it's called. And it was here the Great Bear came out of the mouth of the Menominee River. He didn't want to be alone, and he saw the eagle flying above. He said, "Brother Eagle, come down, be my brother." The eagle descended and walked with him up the river. As they continued to walk, they encountered a moose, wolf, and crane. And these were the first 5 clans of the Menominee people. This is who the Menominee descended from. The Menominees, for centuries, lived off the environment, always making sure that we only took what we needed. But we always gave back in forms of ceremonies, prayers, and offerings, asking the Creator and thanking Him for the good life that we did live in this area. Our people were called dreamers also. And when I say that, is that we could foretell the future in the dreams we had. One of the dreams was that living down in the Green Bay area, there would be a huge wooden boat that would come into the bay. Soon after, this boat did come into the bay, and within this boat was Jean Nicolet. He was the first European to come into Menominee territory. And it's interesting to note that the Menominee say that we discovered him on our shores, but the history books say that Nicolet had discovered the native peoples. The Menominees occupied 10 million acres of land, which is now the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and most of Wisconsin. And within this land, we lived for centuries and called our home. And we are the hunters and gatherers. We did occupy certain areas of that 10 million acres at one time or another. We were not a sedentary people. We went where the fish was. We went where the deer and the bear were and things of that sort. Certain seasons we had to do things. In the spring we had maple sugar, so we had our sugar camps. In the summer we had fishing and growing small gardens. In the fall we had wild rice. And in wintertime was a time of fishing again and doing hunting. So we followed the seasons here in this 10 million acres of land. And of course the Europeans wanted this land to live on as they migrated from the East Coast. Not only Europeans were coming, but also the eastern tribes were being pushed westward into Menominee territory. Our people didn't have no concept of selling or buying or things of that sort. We had no word in our language for boundaries. We didn't know what that was, because one of the things they wanted us to do was set our boundaries. And within this territory, we were free to hunt, fish, and gather. So it was a hard concept for us to imagine. But we did enter into these agreements, and through the series of several treaties, we had to sell most of our land. There's documentations that several of our chiefs were reluctant to do so, but did do so to fulfill our peace and friendship with the United States government. In this time also, Wisconsin was a territory, and the Menominees had the remaining lands that was needed to become a state. So the American government came to us again in 1848 and asked us to cede our remaining lands in Wisconsin and move to Crow Wing, Minnesota. And our chiefs were very suspicious of this treaty and said that we had to look at this Crow Wing country, some 600,000 acres of land. After a party of chiefs went over to look and inspect the Crow Wing country led by Chief Oshkosh, Oshkosh came back with the chiefs and reported to the Menominee people that he didn't like that land over there. The government said it was full of wild rice, fish, and game. And when our chiefs got over there to inspect that land, it wasn't that what the government had said. there was two warring tribes, the Sioux and Chippewa, were in that area. Plus there was not as much wild game and wild rice that we needed to live on. So with that, Oshkosh and a number of chiefs, Menominee chiefs, went to Washington to talk to the Great White Father. And at that time, it was President Fillmore. Oshkosh is quoted to have said that the poorest land in Wisconsin is better than that of the Crow Wing. Please let my people stay in Wisconsin, because it was our ancestral territory. And Oshkosh had told the president, he said, I know an area that is considered a wilderness where no one wants to live. Let me move my tribe there. And the president listened and let the Menominee people stay in the Wolf River area. And that brought about the Treaty of 1854 that established the Menominee Indian Reservation. The wilderness that they were talking about was the forest and the rivers and streams that you see today. This area that our people had cherished for thousands of years was established as a reservation for us, some 276,000 acres of land. Like I had said, we were hunters and gatherers, and we had to make do in this land to live, hunt, fish, and gather. If you can imagine, we had bands of Menominees that had to follow the rules of the treaty and come to this reservation from the Menominee River, from the Green Bay area, from Milwaukee area, all the way down into Chicago, up over into Eau Claire and points in between. All these bands had to move here to the reservation and start a new life in this territory. During this time, there were several changes that took place amongst the Menominee people, and there was always attempts by the missionaries to convert the Menominee people to Christianity. But there was the traditional community at Zor that kept on and clung to the old ways of the medicine lodge and later the dream dance or the big drum, which is still with us today. And our people started to realize there is value to this land. Besides cultural and spiritual value, there is economic value also. This brought about the start cutting some of the forest, the dead and down trees, to process that for lumber for our cabins, for our homes. But then we had asked if we could start cutting some of the white pine and send them down to the mills off the reservation. Our chief said that if we do this right, if we cut this forest in a fashion that it will always be here, let's do that. And Chief Oshkosh came up with the concept of saying if we cut the mature trees, start on the east part of the reservation, by the time we get to the west side of the reservation, it'll be time to start over. And that set up the concept of sustained yield, which is a modern forestry practice today. But after realizing the value of what we had here, the Menominees started becoming financially secure in the things that we needed at that time, up into the early 1900s. During this time, there was a huge blowdown, a tornado that came to the reservation, blew several 100,000 trees down, and that needed to be harvested before it rotted. And our people had this idea to process our own logs here. We asked the government if we could do that, to use our own money to set up a sawmill. Within this time, there was a lot of attempts of assimilation by the government on the Menominee people. There was the boarding schools, of course, where the Menominees were taken off the reservation into a boarding school setting and were not allowed to come back home for long periods of time. And the idea was to take the culture away, take the language away. We had 2 boarding schools right on the reservation. One was operated by the government, the other one was operated by the Catholic Church. There was another attempt to take our culture away called relocation. They would send our families off to cities all across the country and promise of jobs and work and things of that sort. But when our families, say, got to Chicago or Denver or New York, of course, they all had a hard time coming from the reservation and trying to live in a city. And the jobs that they promised weren't there. So they had to try to live by any means in the city. Most of them came back. But through all that, the Menominee people endured, kept our stories, things that were passed down from generation to generation. And the sacred Menominee language that we still speak amongst our people. Through probably about 100 years, we were called one of the most successful tribes in the United States. And there was a lot of people that didn't like that from the government side because we were doing so well. And that we still had a huge land base here on the reservation. We're also managed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, our forest was, but we always kept a good watch on them. In their management practices, they had overcut a lot of our timber, and our people knew that, and we hired lawyers through the money that we had to sue the federal government for the damages to our forest. And this was done in 1934, and it took almost 20 years up until the 1950s that we won the case. We won the huge lawsuit against the federal government in a tune of $8.5 million. And at that time, that was a lot of money. Besides winning this lawsuit, we had built up a huge amount in the treasury, and we were really doing well. There was talk of a senator in Washington that wanted to terminate our tribe because we wanted some of that award money from the lawsuit, and we wanted to distribute that to the tribal membership. He said if the Menominees want to do that, then they should go on their own and be set free from federal supervision. So our tribal leaders found a way to form a government much like the other counties in the state, and the Menominee Reservation was terminated in June of 1954. However, termination didn't take effect till May of 1961. Within this time, the Menominee people lost a lot of our funds we had in the treasury. Individual Menominees had to buy their own land. There were attempts at that time to take the forest away from us. And our leaders formed a corporation, Menominee Enterprises Incorporated, to help keep this land intact, which they did. But we were told that we were not a tribe no more. A lot of our people did not want to teach the language to the younger ones no more. So there was economic loss and cultural loss. There was this huge tax base we had to pay on the forest. And we had to find ways to come up with that because we still had a sawmill, but the sales from the mill itself didn't cover the property tax. So what the board of directors came up with this idea of selling land again. And on the southeastern side of the reservation were 9 spring-fed lakes that they wanted to turn into a lake development and sell these lots to outsiders to come in and build large homes on these lots for them to pay taxes to Menominee County, and therefore help pay the tax on the forest. The lake development was created, what is now Legend Lake. But this idea of selling land again, the Menominee people did not like it because not more than 100 years before we had to sell most of our land through the treaties. Why do we have to do this again? A group of Menominees got together and said, this shouldn't be. Why do we have to sell land? Why do we have to be terminated? Termination is totally against the trust responsibility that the government had to us as Menominee, as a sovereign tribe. And tribal members like Ada Deer and Jim Wash and Watuk, Sylvie Wilbur, just a number of Menominees got together and said, we don't have to accept this. Let's form a group called Drums, Determination, Rights, and Unity of Menominee Stockholders. And let's form this group and fight this lake development. Let's fight for restoration. Let's restore the tribe the way it was before termination. But within that time, the lake was developed, sales had started, several hundred lots were sold. So there was protest by Drums at the land sales office at Legend Lake. And they got an injunction with a judge to stop the lake development. In the meantime, they were lobbying with senators and congressmen in Washington and also at the state level in Madison to repeal termination. A bill, federal bill, called the Menominee Restoration Act was brought forth by Senator Proxmire, and the bill was passed in December 1973 to get restored as a sovereign tribe once again. They said we were not a tribe anymore when we were terminated, but that didn't stop our language to be spoken. Our elders still spoke the language. Unfortunately, a lot of them didn't teach the younger ones, but we're getting that back today. There's a lot of us in the middle-aged group that are speaking now. Our language is taught in the schools, K through 12, in that College of Menominee Nation, and our culture is still intact. One of the reasons our chiefs said, let us live in this land where you think it's worthless, is because of the Wolf River. And it was here for thousands of years. The sturgeon would come up the river each spring to spawn at Kashina Falls. Sturgeon is culturally and spiritually significant to us. In 1892, the dams are built at Shawano that prevented the sturgeon to come to the reservation. And we were out this cultural resource for 100 years, up until 1993 when a group of Menominees got together and said, we want sturgeon to come back because we feel it's a cultural loss. There are ceremonies that we have to do because our ancestors had told us to do them with sturgeon. We can't do them if we don't have them. So a group of our young people, including myself, wanted to go to the Shawano Dam and take sturgeon because we thought it was our cultural right and treaty right. And we said, we'll get arrested if we do that. Well, that's the chance we'll have to take because we need these sturgeon to fulfill these ceremonies that we have to do that were done for centuries before. So the tribal government said, no, you better not do that. You better let us talk to the DNR to see if there's some way they can bring some up to us. And the DNR finally agreed to provide so many a year for us to have a sturgeon feast and celebration. And our people still have that sense of that's something we have to do. Because we believe that we're looking to the 7 generations of those unborn, we're keeping this land for them. We're keeping this river for them. We're keeping the language, we're keeping the culture. We're keeping the concept of being Menominee people, sovereign nation. That's who we are as Menominee people, and that's who we'll be into the future.